Reven. If the reader has not yet had the pleasure of reading the first volume in these series, Beggar. Beggar by Reven. Eslaf Erol was the last of the litter of 5 born to the queen of the prosperous Nordic kingdom of Erogard Lapracopa, and her husband, the king of Erogard, Utlaf. During pregnancy, the queen had been more than twice as wide as she was tall, and the act of delivery took 3 months and 6 days after it had begun. It is perhaps understandable that then Lapracopa elected, upon expelling Eslaf, to frown, say good riddance, and die. Like many Nords, Yitluaf did not care very much for his wife, and less for his children. His subjects were puzzled, therefore, when he announced that he would follow the ancient tradition of his people of Atmora of following his beloved spouse to the grave. They had not thought they were particularly in love, nor were they aware that such a tradition existed. Still, the simple people were grateful, for the little royal drama alleviated their boredom, which was and is a common problem in the more obscure parts of northern Skyrim, particularly in the wintertide. He gathered his household staff and his 5 fat, bawling little heirs in front of him and divided his estate. To his son Yenop he gave his title, to his son Lairnu he gave his land, to his son Soibud he gave his fortune, to his daughter Lykefitra he gave his army. Yitlof's advisors had suggested he keep the inheritance together for the good of his kingdom, but Yitlof did not particularly care for his advisors, or the kingdom, for that matter. Upon making his announcement, he drew his dagger across his throat. One of the nurses, who was rather shy, finally decided to speak as the king's life ebbed away. "Your Highness, you forgot your 5th child, little Eslaf." Good Lutlof groaned, somewhat hard to concentrate with blood gushing from one's throat, after all. The king tried in vain to think of something to bequeath, but there was nothing left. Finally, he sputtered, irritably, "Eslaf should have taken something then," and died. That babe, but a few days old, was expected to demand his rightful inheritance, was arguably unfair. But so Eslaf Erol was given his birthright with his father's dying breath. He would have nothing but what he had taken. Since no one else would have him, the shy nurse, whose name was Druspa, took the baby home. It was a decrepit little shack, and over the years that followed, it became more and more decrepit. Unable to find work, Druspa sold all her furnishings to buy food for little Eslaf. By the time he was old enough to walk and talk, she had sewed the walls and the roof as well, so they had nothing but a floor to call home. And if you've ever been to Skyrim, you can appreciate that that is scarcely sufficient. Druspa did not tell Eslaf the story of his birth, or that his brothers and sisters were leading quite nice lives with their inheritances, for, as we have said, she was rather shy and found it difficult to broach the subject. She was so painfully shy, in fact, that whenever he asked any questions about where he came from, Druspa would run away. That was more or less her answer to everything, to flee. In order to communicate with her at all, Eslaf learned how to run almost as soon as he could walk. He couldn't keep up with his adopted mother at first, but in time he learned to go toe, heel, if he anticipated a short but fast sprint, and heel, toe, if it seemed like Druspa was headed for a long-distance marathon flight. He never did get all the answers he needed from her, but Eslaf did learn how to run. The kingdom of Erolgard had, in the years that Eslaf was growing, become quite a grim place. King Unop did not have a treasury, for Suibad had been given that. He did not have any property for income, for Lernu had been given that. He did not have an army to protect the people, for Lysifitra had been given that. Furthermore, as he was but a child, all decisions in the kingdom went through Unop's rather corrupt council. It had become a bureaucratic, exploitative land of high taxes, rampant crime, and regular incursions from neighboring kingdoms. Not a particularly unusual situation for a kingdom in Tamriel, but an unpleasant one nonetheless. The time finally came when a tax collector arrived to Druspa's hovel, such as it was, to collect the only thing he could, the floor. Rather than protest, the poor shy maid ran away, and Eslaf never saw her again. Without a home or a mother, Eslaf did not know what to do. He had grown accustomed to the cold open air in Druspa's shack, but he was hungry. "May I have a piece of meat?" he asked a butcher down the street. "I'm very hungry." The man had known the boy for years, often spoke to his wife about how sorry he felt for him, growing up in a home with no ceilings or walls. He smiled at Eslaf and said, "Go away, or I'll hit you." Eslaf hurriedly left the butcher and went to a nearby tavern. The tavern keeper had been a former valet in the king's court and knew the boy was by right a prince. Many times he had seen the poor ragged lad in the streets and sighed at the way fate had treated him. "May I have something to eat?" Eslaf asked his tavern keeper. "I'm very hungry." "You're lucky I don't cook you up and eat you," replied the tavern keeper. Eslaf hurriedly left the tavern. For the rest of the day, the boy approached the good citizens of Erolgard begging for food. One person had thrown something at him, but it turned out to be an inedible rock. As night fell, a raggedy man came to Eslaf, and without saying a word, handed him a piece of fruit and a piece of dried meat. The lad took it, wide-eyed, and as he devoured it, he thanked the man very sweetly. "If I see you begging on the streets tomorrow, I'll kill you myself," the man growled. "There are only so many beggars we have the guild allow in any one town, and you make it too many. You are ruining business." It was a good thing Eslaf Erol knew how to run, because he ran all night. Eslaf Erol's story is continued in the book Thief.
Mara, protect us both.
At least something good came out of that trip to Sarthal. I didn't find anything but dust. I'm right behind you.
They deserve better.
Thief by Reven. I will tell you this much, gentle reader. When we last saw Eslaf, he was a boy, an orphan, a failed beggar, running through the streets of wild Skyrim, in the wild winter woods, far away from his home of Erolgard. He continued running, stopping here and there, for many more years, until he was a young man. Eslaf discovered that among the ways of getting food, asking for it was the most troublesome. Far easier was finding it in the wilderness or taking it from unguarded market stalls. The only thing worse than begging to get food was begging for the opportunity to work for the money to buy it. That seemed needlessly complicated. No. As far as Eslaf was concerned, he was best off being a scavenger, a beggar, and a thief. He committed his first act of thievery shortly after leaving Erolgard, while in the southern woods of Tambrakar, in the rugged land near Mount Jensen, just east of the village of Horbeld. Eslaf was starving, having not eaten anything but a rather scrawny raw squirrel in 4 days, and he smelled meat cooking, and then found the smoke. A band of minstrel bards was making camp. He watched them from the bushes as they cooked and joked and flirted and sang. He could have asked them for some food, but so many others had refused him before. Instead, he rushed out, grabbed a piece of meat from the fire, and wincing up from the burns, scrambled up to the nearest tree and started to devour it while the bards stood under him and laughed. "What's your next move, thief?" giggled a fair, red-headed woman who was covered with tattoos. "How do you intend to disappear without us catching and punishing you?" As the hunger subsided, Eslaf realized she was right. The only way to get out of the tree without falling in their midst was to take the branch down to where it hung over a creek. It was a drop off a cliff of about 50 feet. That seemed like the wisest strategy, so Eslaf began crawling in that direction. "You don't know how to fall, boy?" called out a young Khajiit, but a few years older than Eslaf, thin but muscular, graceful even in his slightest movements. "If you don't, you should just climb down here and take what's coming for you. It's idiotic to break your neck when we just give you some bruises and send you on your way." "Of course I know how to fall," Eslaf called back, but he didn't. He just thought the trick of falling was to have nothing underneath you and let nature take its course. But 50 feet up, when you're looking down, is enough to give anyone pause. "I'm sorry to doubt your abilities, Master Thief," said the Khajiit, grinning. "Obviously you know how to fall feet first with your body straight, but loose to avoid cracking like an egg. It seems like you're destined to escape us." Eslaf wisely followed the Khajiit's hints and leapt into the river, falling without so much grace, but without hurting himself. In the years that followed, he had to make several more drops from even greater heights, usually after a theft, sometimes without water beneath him, and he improved the basic technique. When he arrived in the western town of Jotunheim on the morning of his 21st birthday, it didn't take him long to find out who the most richest, most deserving of being burgled person was. An impregnable palace in the park near the center of the town was owned by a mysterious young man named Suibud. Eslaf wasted no time in finding the palace and watching it. A fortified palace, he had come to learn, was like a person, with quirks and habits beneath its hard shell. It was not an old place. Evidently whatever money the Suibud had come into was fairly recent. Was regularly patrolled by guards, implying that the rich man was fearful of being burgled, with good reason. The most distinctive feature of this palace was its tower, rising 100 feet above its stone walls, doubtlessly giving the occupant a great defensive view. Eslaf guessed that if Suibud was as paranoid as he guessed him to be, the tower would also provide a view of the palace storehouse. The rich man would want to keep an eye on his fortune. That meant that the loot couldn't be directly beneath the tower, but somewhere in the courtyard within the walls. The light in the tower shone all night long, so Eslaf boldly decided that the best time to burgle was in the light of day, when Suibud must be sleeping. That would be the time the guards would least expect a thief to pounce. And so, when the noon sun was shining over the palace, Eslaf quickly scaled the wall near the front gate and waited, hidden in the crenulations. The interior courtyard was plain and desolate, with few places to hide, but he saw that there were 2 wells. One the guards used from time to time to draw up water and slake their thirst, but Eslaf noticed that the guards would pass by the other well, never using it. He waited until the guards were distracted, just for a second, by the arrival of a merchant in a wagon, bearing goods for the palace. While they were searching his wagon, Eslaf leapt elegantly, feet first, from the wall into the well. It was not a particularly soft landing, for, as Eslaf had guessed, the well was not full of water, but gold. Still, he knew how to roll after a fall, and he didn't hurt himself. In the dank, subterranean warehouse, he stuffed his pockets with gold and was about to go through the door, which he assumed would lead to the tower, when he noticed a gem the size of an apple, worth more than all the gold that was left. Eslaf found room for it down his pants. The door did indeed lead to the tower, and Eslaf followed its curving stairwell up, walking quietly but quickly. At the top, he found the master of the palace's private quarters, ornate and cold, with invaluable artwork and decorative swords and shields on the walls. Eslaf assumed that the snoring lump under the sheets was Soybud, but he didn't investigate too closely. He crept to the windows and looked out. It was going to be a difficult fall, for certain. He needed to jump from the tower, past the walls, and hit the tree on the other side. The tree branches would hurt, but they would break his fall. There was a pile of hay that he left under the tree to prevent further injury. Eslaf was about to leap when the occupant of the room woke up with a start, yelling, "My gem!" Eslaf and stared at him for a second. Wide-eyed, they looked alike. Not surprising, since they were brothers. Eslaf Erol's story is continued in the book Warrior.